Hey everyone, it's Lars here and welcome back to Virtual Paddock. Today with part 4 of the history of the Porsche 911. By the mid-1990s, the 911 had already been around for more than 30 years. And especially the air-cooled flat 6 was reaching the limits of its potential. Emissions regulations were getting stricter and Porsche was also struggling financially. So if they wanted to survive, they'd have to change a lot. And that's exactly what happened when in 1997 Porsche introduced the 996. And this wasn't just an evolution of the previous generation, this was a complete redesign. First of all, it looks completely different to the 993. The lines are sleeker and more modern, a huge change in Porsche's design language. In fact, the front end was shared with a new Boxster, a mid-engined roadster they'd introduced in 1996. However, the most notable change was the engine. It was now water-cooled. 300 horsepower in the Carrera from a 3.4 litre flat 6. Though in 2002 they upped it to 3.6 with 320 horsepower, along with a general facelift. The turbo on the other hand had a 3.6 all the way through, first with 420 horsepower and then from 2004 onwards with 450 horsepower. In fact, this was the generation where Porsche introduced the side air inlets for the standard turbo, which is now one of its trademarks. First seen on the 959, then the 964 and 993 Turbo S. And ever since the 996 they've been on the 911 Turbo as well. There were also two new track-focused models. First one was the 911 GT3, which came out in 1999. Rear-wheel drive and with a naturally aspirated 3.6 litre flat 6 with 360 horsepower. And this was the first road car to lap the Nordschleife in under 8 minutes, when Walter Röhrl did a 7:56. Then 2 years later came the GT2, similar concept as the GT3, but this one was turbocharged. Also rear-wheel drive and more powerful than the turbo, with 462 horsepower. Now, you could kind of argue that this wasn't the first 911 GT2, there had already been one for the 993. However, the 993 GT2 had been a homologation model, whereas the 996 GT2 was designed as a road car. Plus, the 993 version was actually badged as 911 GT and not GT2, whereas the 996 GT2 actually did carry the GT2 badge. And with the 996's facelift in the early 2000s, both the GT2 and GT3 were upgraded as well. More power for both, 381 horsepower for the GT3 and 483 horsepower for the GT2. And the GT3 even got another, even more track-focused and lightweight variant, the GT3 RS. So let's take one for a drive. Right, so time for a drive in the 996 GT3 RS. And I decided to do this at Hockenheim because the GT3 RS has always been a track day car. So it is road legal and you could drive it anywhere you want, but it's meant to be driven quickly. For example, at the racetrack. I even like to say that basically it's just road legal so you can drive it to the racetrack. And the GT3 RS's origins actually lay in the club sport package that was available as a no-cost option for the 996 GT3 models. If you chose that option, you get bucket seats, you get a fire extinguisher, a roll cage, a 6-point harness for the driver, which wasn't installed, but you could install it if you wanted to. And so for the 996 Mark II, Porsche decided to do a special edition based on that Club Sport package. And that was this GT3 RS. which has, for example, some parts made of carbon fiber. The front end was actually taken from the GT3 Cup race car that ever since the 996 has been used in the Porsche Carrera Cup. They also used titanium for some bits of the engine. It's actually interesting. Porsche claimed that the GT3 RS and the 996 made the same power as the normal GT3 Mark II. So 381. But they tested this on the dyno, and it actually came out that made more like 400 horsepower. Now, in general, the 996 did have some issues. One of which, even though it's subjective, was the styling. I already mentioned there was a huge change in Porsche's design language, and that the 996 at first shared its front end with the Boxster, which was then Porsche's entry-level model. And some people took issue with that. Some people didn't want their premium 911 to look like a car that was lower in the range. I mean, I don't mind, but even apart from those people, a lot of people didn't like the shape of the headlights on the Mark I. They nicknamed the fried egg headlights. So they changed the shape for the Mark II. So yeah, the styling obviously very subjective, but some people it was an issue. But even objectively speaking, the 996 did have some issues. Like, at least the Carrera models and Targa, I think the GT3 wasn't affected. I don't know if the turbo was. But yeah, some models, the intermediate shaft bearing in the engine, or IMS bearing for short, is quite prone to failure. And basically now, if you want to buy a used 996, it's important to make sure that the IMS bearing has been replaced. But speaking of buying a 996, it's actually, as of now, the most affordable generation of 911. Like, I checked on the used market a while ago in Germany, and the 996 Carrera rear-wheel drive goes for like 30,000 to 40,000 euros. Whereas like a 993 is easily double that. Basically, I decided for myself that if I ever get a 911, if I ever manage to afford one, it's likely gonna be a 996, like 996 Carrera. because it's probably gonna be the only one that I'm ever gonna be able to afford. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if the prices are gonna pick up eventually. Because it's still a Porsche 911. And also nowadays, when I read the comments about the 996 on the internet, it always gets a lot of love. So it seems like people have warmed up the 996 now. I mean, it's been like 20 years. This car, the GT3 RS, is pretty much exactly 20 years old now. So yeah, GT3 RS, it's a staple of the 911 model range now. And this is where it all began. With the 996. Now, all of these changes that came with the 996 were probably a bit too much for some 911 enthusiasts. And luckily for them, Porsche did take the criticism to heart for the next generation. Introduced in 2004 for the 2005 model year, the 997. Gone were the fried egg headlights and back were the classic circular ones. Though in a lot of ways, the 997 was still an evolution of the 996. Same 3.6 liter engine in the Carrera models, 325 horsepower now. The S models got a bit more though, a 3.8 with 360 horsepower. For the turbo, Porsche kept the 3.6. However, it gets some new turbochargers, which not only upped the power to 480 horsepower, but also had VTG, variable turbine geometry, which managed to both eliminate turbo lag at low revs and prevent excessive back pressure at high revs. And all of the Carrera and turbo models were offered with a choice of transmissions. You could either get a manual or the automatic Tiptronic S. Whereas the GT models were manual only. And again, there were three of them. The GT3, GT3 RS, and GT2. In the GT3 models, you had a 3.6 naturally aspirated with 415 horsepower. It also had a different front bumper than the Carrera and turbo models, as well as a split rear wing. And the GT3 RS specifically had an even larger rear wing made of carbon fiber. It was wide at the rear to improve cornering, and you could even get a roll cage. The GT2 was quite a bit more powerful, 530 horsepower from the turbocharged 3.6. In fact, at the time, this was the most powerful 911 to have ever been sold to the public, and also the fastest, with a top speed of 329 km an hour. Now, for the 2009 model year, the 997 got a facelift, and this is known as the 997 Gen 2 or 997.2. The front bumpers got larger air intakes, the headlights now have LED running lights, and the engine was mounted 10mm lower now. It also got direct fuel injection, giving the whole range a power boost. 345 horsepower for the standard Carrera models with a 3.6, and 385 in the Carrera S and 4S with 3.8. In 2011, Porsche added the Carrera GTS models to the range, above the S, also with 3.8, making 408 horsepower in the GTS. And the turbo got 3.8 as well, making 500 horsepower now. However, the most notable change for the 997.2 was on the transmission side. The Tiptronic S was replaced by the new dual-clutch PDK, a 7-speed automatic. You could get most of the 911 range with a 6-speed manual as well though. The only exception was the Turbo S, a more powerful version of the Turbo with 530 horsepower. That one was PDK only. The GT models on the other hand were still manual only. The GT3 had a 3.8 as well now, with 435 horsepower. And compared to the previous models, they had actually doubled the amount of downforce. The GT3 RS still had even more downforce. And slightly more power as well, 450 horsepower. It also had a roll cage as standard. And to improve acceleration, the gear ratios in the RS were actually shorter than in the standard GT3. Then for 2011, Porsche did a limited edition of the GT3 RS, known as the GT3 RS 4.0, with a 4-liter flat 6 making 500 horsepower. That didn't only make more power, but also more downforce, especially at the front due to the front dive planes. The king of the 997 range, however, was the GT2 RS, introduced in May of 2010. This one had a 3.6-liter twin-turbo flat 6, producing 620 horsepower, which at the time made it the most powerful and fastest 911 and overall Porsche road car ever made. It was more powerful than the Carrera GT. So let's take this one for a drive. Right, so time for a drive in the 997 GT2 RS. Only 500 of these were made, so very much a limited production car. And knowing that you were in such a rare car was really one of its very few luxuries. Because this car was all about performance and all about being lightweight. Both parts made of carbon fiber, the rear windows plastic, there were no rear seats. And I could be wrong, but I think that even the aircon infotainment system, which you see this one has, I think even those were options. So in its basic idea, it's very much like the GT3 RS, that both are very much track day cars and meant to be driven quickly and completely tuned for performance. However, unlike the GT3 models, Porsche has never offered a GT2 and a GT2 RS simultaneously in the range. The last 911 GT2 came with the 997.1. And then from the 997.2 onwards was only the GT2 RS. So really the GT2 RS replaced the GT2. Now I mentioned that this one was even more powerful than the Carrera GT. Not by a lot. The Carrera GT had 612 horsepower, I think, from a 5.7 liter V10, naturally aspirated. And this one had 8 more horsepower, 620. However, on track, this one was a lot faster due to being so lightweight and all about performance. In fact, around the Nordschleife, the GT2 RS was 14 seconds faster than the Carrera GT. The Carrera GT did a 7:32. GT2 RS from the 997 did a 7:18. which also means that the GT2 RS easily beats the time after which it was named internally. Because this car's internal codename at Porsche was 727. And that came from the fact that one of the Nissan GT-R lap times around the Nordschleife was a 727. It did actually go faster later, but one of the lap times it did was a 727 back in 2009. So Porsche aimed to beat that. And as I mentioned, they did. And quite clearly, by 9 seconds. So that's the 996 and 997. Quite an expansion of the 911 model range, especially for the 997. And there was even more of that to come with the next generation. But I'll tell you more about that in the next part of this series. So for now, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. So, till next time, use the downforce, and see you soon.